sell side as well. So hopefully that will tick people's boxes in terms of those of you who may be working in procurement, who are tendering for social value, but also maybe for those of you who are also on the sell side, who are thinking about, well, how on earth can I actually respond to a tender question? Because sometimes it's about understanding what the client is after with regards to social value, both from a tendering perspective, but also actually from a legislative perspective as well. So there's a few sort of areas and strands that I'm going to talk about today in the webinar. I believe Daniela will also be taking the Q&A, so we'll have time for some questions at the end as well. But in the meantime, this is what I'm going to be talking about. We hear a lot, particularly in public procurement, about value for money. And there's also now a new term from sort of the recent Procurement Act and also recent policy that talks about social value for money. So what I'm going to be thinking about is, as I say, is social value from the buying side perspectives. So how do we build social value into procurement? But also from the sell side perspective, how do you respond, or how would you expect your suppliers to respond to social value questions in the bids? And I'll be wrapping up the webinar with how the Procurement Act 2023 is going to aim to unlock social value as well. There's been a slip to that at the moment. So the Procurement Act was supposed to come into effect at the end of this month, but the new government has decided to slip that for various policy reasons, of which I will discuss later. So what is value for money and social value for money? If we think about SIPs, we very often think about the 5 rights. So we think about, we want things in the right quantity, we want it to the right quality, we want it at the right time, and of course we want it both coming from and going to the right place. And of course, all things that supply people are always involved in and interested in, is at the right price as well. So of course, our businesses are expecting us to get the right price for our sort of procurements. But is that value for money? Well, if we get all of those right, then hopefully we will get value for money, because as long as we get that right quantity to the right quality at the right time, at the right place and the right price, we should get a good deal. The government look at things slightly different. They look at things about what they call the 3 E's. So they have economy, efficiency, and effectiveness that actually demonstrate value for money. So they look at how we're spending the money in terms of spending less. We look at how well we're spending it, and we're looking at how wisely we spend it as well. So public procurement is very much about the most economically advantageous tender, what is known as MEAT. And we look at that by taking that balance between price and quality. And then we do a calculation to work out who is actually the winning bidder from that particular best price and quality ratio. And what tends to happen is we tend to weight those 2 areas in terms of what is most important. And these days, of course, part of the quality questions that we have include social value. There is at least a minimum of 10% social value that is applied nowadays in public sector procurement. Therefore, that is a significant chunk out of that potential quality score that is set aside specifically for social value in that particular instance. Particularly if you're even looking at something that is 60% quality and 40% price, that still then only leaves another 50% for everything else that a buyer might want to quiz their supplier on with regards to a tender. So the efficiency sort of side of things, and we see here we've got Taikai Ono mentioned here as well in terms of the 7 wastes of lean, is all about making sure that we're doing things in a way where we're not wasting anything. So we have to make sure that what we're delivering is actually an efficient output, an efficient use of resources, because of course when we are buying things, we want to make sure that the price we're paying is delivering us a good product. And if it's a service, it's delivering us a good service that has been being delivered in an efficient manner. So when we think about efficiency, we immediately reflect back to Taikai Ono, and we start thinking about where there could potentially be waste. And the 7 wastes of lean are indeed there on that slide. The effectiveness side of things is basically being able to produce a successful and an intended outcome. So if we are seeking to have a particular service delivered or a particular product delivered, then obviously what we are looking for that to be done is in the most effective and efficient manner. And this is where HM Treasury have pulled in their 3Es scenario on the value for money side of things by adding effectiveness and efficiency together with the economy side of things that says, if I get a good price, things are delivered to an efficient way, and they're effective at what they deliver me, then for the taxpayer, I am basically achieving that value for money outcome. So when we're thinking about social value, we are thinking about adding on that social value for money aspect on top of that. So if we are thinking about those 3Es, we are thinking about economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And actually on top of that, are we giving back to the society that we are operating in? So that's where the additional social value for money actually comes on. When we think about being buyers and we're buying social value, or we're buying a product or a service where we would like to see social value embedded, if you work in the public sector, then you have the legislation and you have the public procurement notice that you are operating to in accordance with the Social Value Act. If you are in private sector, though, you need to start to think a little bit more differently in terms of, well, potentially I might want to meet that legislation, the Social Value Act 2012, but what else does my business want to achieve? So we have to start thinking about building into procurement a social value strategy. So any business will have missions, visions, values, a strategic direction that they want to go in. Alongside that, we can build a social value strategy that says that, maybe the business wants to grow in a particular area. It may be that growing in that particular area will actually allow the business to attract new skills or new jobs, or they may be able to employ particular segments of society, like maybe people with neurodiversity, for example. That building in those elements to our procurement strategies can actually help us build in that social value as well. We, of course, need to have some form of measurable progress. So we can't just sort of say, well, we'll introduce something and then we never measure it. We have to set a baseline, and then we have to have a measurable progress way of understanding whether we've actually achieved that or not. Employee engagement is pretty key here. It may very well be that there are areas within the business where some employees have really good ideas about doing this kind of thing. And getting the employees and the stakeholders bought in will make procurement's job easier when we're trying to establish social value deliverables as part of those procurements. And of course, transparency and accountability is also quite key in building any kind of social value strategy. Again, stakeholder involvement, we have to make sure that they are comfortable with what is being done, and also feel that we in procurement are accountable for at least delivering the social value from a procurement perspective when we're delivering those procurement acquisition activities. Never forget, though, that we need to allocate resources to do it. You may have, or you may require, a social value manager in the organisation. It may already exist if you're a large organisation and you operate a corporate social responsibility section, or somebody takes on that role, and therefore that can be dovetailed into enhancing the social value strategy too. And the other thing to never be afraid of with social value, because life goes on, because things change, because economics change, because demographics change and things like that, we have to be able to adapt, and we have to be able to evolve, both as a business, but also with our corporate social responsibility and our social value deliverable as well. So from a procurement perspective, we have to essentially understand that change is going to be quite common. And fundamentally, if you're going to take a really profound shift, we may very well integrate it into our business operations. This does demand a very profound shift in our approach to social value, to our dedication to social value. It's often very much built into our corporate social responsibility strategies as well, in terms of how we are as a business going to give back to the society that we operate within. It also requires companies sometimes, if we're really serious about it, to completely remodel their entire operations, and certainly their operational approach, particularly if they're placing social responsibility right at the core of it. I live in Gloucestershire, and there's an organisation called Ren Plan, I think it is, and they basically operate solely on a social value strategy. So they employ disabled people of various disabilities, both physical and mental, and that is at the heart of their operations. So all of their employees have various registered disabilities, because that is their business operation model. Absolutely, social value is at the heart of everything that they absolutely do. So you can either go 100% that way, or you can at least consider how you're going to embed social value into an operational approach, if that is what the organisation wishes to do. To do so, though, of course, it's crucial for a sustainability and longevity perspective of how your company's societal impact is then considered and, of course, measured in terms of progress, and how it's going to enhance the brand reputation of your business as well. It's an incredibly profound shift to take. Not all businesses take that particular step. Some have, and that is very much, as I say, what their business is built around, but it's probably not for everybody. Some more things to think about in terms of when we're building a social value strategy into our procurement day-to-day work, or our procurement strategies, is again having measurable metrics. There is no point whatsoever from a procurement perspective to think, I'll just ask the supplier some questions to see what they do here, without setting some baselines and without potentially having some measurable metrics in your contracts with them afterwards. Because otherwise, what is the point of asking them a question on social value if you're not then going to be bothered to measure whether they've actually delivered it afterwards? As with all tender assessments, an objective assessment of their response in your bids is what you're looking for. You may want to have some very diverse metrics in terms of what you're trying to achieve. But throughout all of that, when you're setting those questions in that tender document for your suppliers to complete, you want to make sure that you're acting on an informed decision-making process. So during the creation of any tender documentation that you're doing, and you're considering asking a supplier of social value, do make sure that you're buying in the stakeholders that are involved, so that they feel that you are asking the supplier something that is actually going to be quite important to the business. Otherwise, again, you're just asking superfluous questions. And always think about continuous improvement. As I say, time is moving on, policies are moving on, demographics are changing significantly these days. So never think that when you've put some form of social value strategy in place that it's just going to stand still. Always think about continuous improvement, and also think about how your suppliers can help you in that continuous improvement journey too. And it's all about that societal contribution. Particularly in public sector, there are some areas of the Social Value Act 2012, and certainly the policy that public procurement has engaged with, where they are tackling certain themes. And very much they have put a number of themes in at the moment, and one of them at least has already changed, but they haven't changed the policy yet. So they've tried to deal with COVID-19 and the effect of COVID-19. We've probably gotten over that now, so that policy now needs to be updated. So that continuous improvement and how that societal contribution should adapt through time also needs to be put in place. And just going back up to the top one on the measurable metrics, never ever think as well that your measurable metrics will stay still. Always remember the SMART acronym, and always make sure that the R is always kept relevant. So if societal contribution has changed over the period of the time that your supplier has been delivering something, for example, don't be scared of changing the measurable metrics with them to make sure that it's keeping up to date with things that are going on, or maybe it's actually reflecting where they have done certain societal contributions, and you want to stretch them that little bit further. Preparation is key with most things, and this is certainly one of them. So do consider social value as early as possible, normally when you're developing that requirements phase. And really be specific about the themes that you do want your suppliers to consider. Is it something that is directly linked to your corporate social responsibility agenda and your strategy there? Is it something else that you want the supplier to consider, where you want them to think about something slightly different from a societal contribution? It doesn't always have to be directly linked to what you're asking them to do. And this is the other aspect of the public procurement side of things. Very often suppliers will respond in their bids to say, well, we're developing new skills, we're providing jobs, we do 150 apprentices a year. But what we're looking for really is, yes, that's fine, that's lovely, but what are you actually doing for my contract? What's the contribution that you are giving back to the society under social value for my particular requirement? And that's where we need to just drill down that extra little level about understanding what is the theme I need my suppliers to consider when I'm putting together that tender documentation for them to actually respond to. And with everything in any tender documentation or any procurement documentation as well, is clearly state your objectives and the outcomes that you are seeking. Because again, that helps the suppliers to understand what it is that you're actually looking for. Again, social value can feel a bit fluffy to some people, and they very often aren't clear about what it is that you are actually looking for. If it is something in your corporate social responsibility strategy as an organisation, provide them with the corporate social responsibility strategy so that they can see where it is you're trying to achieve that societal contribution. Not only will that get you a better response from your supplier, it will also get you a better deliverable at the end of the day. So it's about sharing that information and helping the suppliers understand it just as well as you do. So there's some key questions here to consider, actually, that I put together for you. So how much social value are you as a business creating already? Are you just simply asking a supplier to consider social value just because it ticks a few boxes corporately? Or are you actually asking them to help you achieve social value or to add to the social value that you are creating already? And therefore, is that value additional or is it embedded into the service itself? So taking the apprentices example that I just gave, most businesses have some form of graduate scheme or an apprenticeship scheme, but is that value considered to be, it is what it is because that's how the business operates and therefore it is embedded into the way that they work? Or are we seeking something extra? Are we seeking them to create apprentices in a particular skill type, which will at least retain those skills for us to call upon in the future? And did anyone else contribute to creating that social value? Is it just your supplier that's working in isolation, or are they working with other partners within the community too? And what would have happened anyway if you hadn't asked for it? Things like apprentices and apprenticeship schemes and graduate schemes. As I say, businesses do them all the time. Therefore, they are creating an element of that social value of creating new jobs and new skills anyway. It's just that it's not particular in that particular instance for a particular contract. Also think about the relative importance of the outcomes that you are looking for. Again, is it something that is absolutely fundamentally meeting a corporate social responsibility element of your strategy that you just haven't managed to do? Or is it something that, again, is just helping to build on what you're doing already? And how can you support your suppliers in achieving those outcomes with the most value? Collaboration is very often the key here, because if your suppliers are helping you to achieve your social value agenda, then again, supporting them in doing so will get the most value out because you're basically working together as a team. So how to prepare? The best thing is communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. So do feel free to hold things like pre-market discussions and engagements. before you start your procurement process. Because, of course, once you start that, then, of course, you can't really communicate with your suppliers in the way that you would like to. Build some form of social value into your contract registers in terms of how things are being delivered and what suppliers are really good at doing that. Try and think about how you can deliver training for local businesses. So if you're trying to attract local SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and they're struggling to understand how to deliver social value to you, then help them to understand what the social value is that you're looking for and the kinds of activities that you want them to consider. And always have clear, really enforceable criteria with weightings that are then measurable when you put that into contract. And always try and ask the right questions. And above all, do try and encourage innovation. Right, just take a quick break there. When we're in the procurement stage, the other thing that we need to think about is how we review our project pipeline. And again, talking to all our stakeholders to determine where there are areas where we can improve and therefore how it can be delivered better through our contracts. This talks a lot to contract governance. We very often forget as procurement people, once the procurement work has been done and the contract's in place, we may hand that over to somebody else to manage it. But at the procurement stage, we should very much be starting to think about how that should be managed, because we are at the forefront of putting that procurement activity together. There should be clear golden threads. If you're in public sector, then that will obviously be from government priorities and government policies. If it's private sector that you work in, then that is going to be from the business strategy and the business vision and mission statement and the direction that the organization wants to go. And then link that through into what you're delivering in your programs and your projects, and how you then develop that into your procurement specifications, whether that is a build to print kind of specification or manufacturing specification, or even a service outcome, service level agreement kind of requirement that you're putting together. And always think about how mature your market is. SMEs are great in terms of being incredibly enthusiastic to help people, but sometimes they're not as mature at delivering things, especially things like social value, as maybe a larger organization might be, who has the resources and the money to actually do that kind of thing. So do understand the drivers of the cost, quality, efficiency, and social value, and how that affects how your suppliers are going to operate. If we ask too much, particularly the smaller businesses, we could actually drive them out of business, which is not what we want to do. So build that model award criteria and your subcontract criteria. Have a good structured model evaluation set of questions if you want, and a set of reporting metrics. Build them into your procurement documentation and, of course, your contract. And just take time to get it right. There is absolutely no problem in taking your time to get your procurement documentation right, to make sure that you're not going to mess up later on. Most people would say, I would sooner you took a couple of extra weeks more to get that procurement opportunity right, rather than have to keep reissuing things while we're during procurement, or having to reissue tender documents during that time. Think about more of the strategic top-level outcomes, what you want to achieve, what do you want the supplier to achieve as an outcome, what are you looking for things for them to help you improve on, rather than outputs, because then it allows the suppliers to explain to you that they can do all kinds of different things to deliver that outcome to you, and some of them might be really quite innovative. And then evaluate it and then monitor it is the message I want to give. And then, of course, bed in those KPIs. If you are in public sector, and I'll talk about this in a moment, we are going to be encouraged to put more KPIs into our contracts at the procurement stage. So again, social value can be one of those. Think about how you're going to monitor and measure your suppliers, and how you're going to encourage continuous improvement and innovation, as well as actually delivering those social value outcomes. The default on social value KPIs is considered to be on a 3-monthly basis, because in some instances you can't see anything move within a 1-month timescale. But again, it depends what you're actually delivering. In some cases, you may even want to stretch it to a 6-month or even an annual KPI measurement to see how things are going. For government's most important contracts, then generally these are done on a quarterly basis for those social value KPIs. So what about on the sell side perspective? So those of you who may be selling to buyers who are asking you about social value, particularly prevalent in public sector. As I say, the Public Services Social Value Act 2012 really bedded into legislation about how all public sector authorities had to have regard to delivery of social value in their contracts. And it essentially is applicable to pretty much everybody in public sector. And particularly those in local authorities and NHS to consider how those services that they generally go through commissioning and procuring are expected to improve things like social, economic, and environmental well-being of maybe the area that they look after, or the social, economic, and environmental well-being of people that they look after if they're in the NHS organisation themselves. But it's not restricted just to those particular areas. It's all public sector that has to think about it. The good news is there is a lot of guidance available. So even if you're sat here on this webinar today and you are sat in a procurement role, but you are a procurement role in private sector, you might still want to have a look at this to get some ideas on how you might want to approach your social value procurement in your own organisation. If you are public sector, then this is your Bible, essentially. Cabinet Office guidance was published in 2020, in June 2020, when most of us were on lockdown. And it bedded in the fact that they felt, essentially, that although the Social Value Act had come out 8 years beforehand, not many people were thinking about it. So they essentially bedded it into procurement policy in public sector. When you go to that particular PPN 0620, and I popped a QR code on there as well that takes you to that page, there are 3 key documents there. There is the social value model, which basically explains the themes that the government was interested in 2020. As I say, one of those was COVID-19, quite topical at the time it came out, but we've moved on from then. Probably the impact of COVID-19 is not necessarily in your face anymore as much as it was back then. Maybe time for a refresh. The other themes are absolutely key still. There are things like diversity in jobs, creating new skills, environmental and good well-being, and things like that as well. So key themes under which you find sub-themes as well. That's the social value model. Then there is another document that talks about how you use the social value model. And that talks about, as a public sector procurement person, it actually gives you model award criteria questions that you can ask your suppliers. And it also tells you the kind of responses that you would expect from your suppliers against that particular question. Then what they've done is the quick reference table is basically a shortened version of that second document. So irrespective of whether you are a public sector buyer, or whether you are a private sector buyer, or whether you are on the sell side and you are responding to public sector tenders, this information is gold dust, particularly that second document where they actually provide model award questions for you to put into your tender documentation. So by all means, absolutely use that to your heart's content. There's also another organisation that is a quasi sort of government stroke consultancy kind of group of people who have been set up to help businesses understand social value. And that is known as the Social Value Portal. Again, there is an absolute goldmine of information that is available there for you to use and get hold of in terms of that Social Value Portal. Lots of guidance, lots of training, lots of information, lots of case studies to think about as well. So if you are bidding for public sector contracts with social value, then those 2 areas would be your absolute go-to places to get all the guidance, all the information, the model questions, what you're expected to respond on. And then the social value portal is just that icing on the cake that gives a little bit extra in terms of helping you to respond to those kinds of bids. The other sort of thing that I would like to say as well is that if you are on the sell side, or even if you are on the receiving end of bids coming in from your suppliers, what we would expect any seller or supplier to do is to read the tender question. You'd be surprised how many suppliers do not read tender questions and then expect to get a good mark when they get their tender assessed. And we would also expect them to read the guidance too. As a bidder, one of the key areas that you need to be interested in is what are the areas of social value that my buyer is really interested in? Is it something I've done before? Is it something completely new to me? Therefore, you would dig around. If it's something that you've done before, you would dig around in your case studies and you would find a good case study to say, this is what we did before. It was really successful. The client loved it. All that wonderful sales fluff. But then you would think about what could we do better for this particular client? And how can our organization add value to the buyers in ways that actually wouldn't cost us anything? There's a lot of things that we can do as organizations sometimes that actually don't cost a penny, but we can do it as part of our normal day-to-day business. You can also use what we call the national TOMs, which are the Themes, Outcomes and Measures framework that was first developed to help organizations understand all of this when the Social Value Act 2012 came out. And this was, again, a joint effort by that social value portal, so socialvalueportal.com, and the Local Government Association. Predominantly because it was the local government and local authorities that had already been using social value for so long. And therefore, they knew what they'd seen, they knew what they wanted delivered in terms of social value back into society locally, and therefore worked with the Social Value Portal to create these TOMs. So again, you can get an awful lot of information, irrespective of whether you're on buy side or sell side, in terms of setting up your tenders and then answering those tender questions, if indeed you are on the sell side. So what I would encourage any suppliers to do is to embed social value into all of their bids, irrespective of whether they are asked a question or not, because again, it shows an understanding of the specific needs of the bid or the specific needs of the buyer and maybe the community that is surrounding the buyer as well. And we would expect the suppliers to showcase their commitment to this. Case studies, testimonials, interviews, quotes, sort of vox pops and that kind of stuff, and quantifiable impacts to actually demonstrate, yes, we set out to do this and look at what we've improved in this particular area. And of course, we would also hope that they're going to measure their impact. So any company could measure the success of their employment initiative simply by working out the number of jobs they've created for local residents, for example, and then tracking that long-term employment rate in the area, and then start to work out how that results in an economic uplift in the community. How does the area improve? Does it get gentrified or anything of that nature? You can start to see measurable improvements in the way that you're approaching things. And when we're reading a qualitative response from our suppliers, or if you're putting together a qualitative response to your buyer, do try and contain things of best practice. And I've listed a few best practice things here on this particular slide. So where social value commitments are being made, give examples of where that has actually happened or where benefits have actually occurred. Give evidence. Evidence will be provided to the council to confirm commitments have delivered. We're expecting our suppliers to make those kinds of statements on their commitments. Providing details of local organisations that have been involved in the delivery of the social value. Have they done it on their own, or have they worked with partners and engaged other partners that maybe, the buyer's already aware of? We would also hope they've got an action plan for the delivery of those social value commitments. If we are in public sector and we're using the PPN 0620, then we actually ask our suppliers for a timed commitment plan to deliver the social value. And how is it going to be verified? How are we actually going to measure it? How are we going to make the claims that we've actually achieved that social value as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how the Procurement Act 2023 is going to aim to unlock social value from the principles that are being brought in here. So the Procurement Act, which is now going to go live on February the 24th next year, it was going to be the 28th of this month, but they have slipped it, actually makes no reference whatsoever to social value at all. Doesn't even make a mention of it when we talk about value for money. However, what it does do is it does a number of subtly different things that gets us to think a little bit more about social benefit and getting that societal contribution. So the Procurement Act itself, we were looking at meat earlier about how we do that balance between price and quality. And very often there's been an emphasis on the price bit. So a lot of public sector organisations they've done their procurements, they've done their evaluations, but the way that they've evaluated the price has always been driven towards the cheapest. It's called relative scoring. What they do is they look at the cheapest bid gets the highest score, and then those that are slightly more expensive get slightly less of a score. So it always favours the cheapest price. What they're trying to do now with the new Procurement Act is take that away and actually say, yeah, price is still important, of course it is, because you've got to stay within budget. But what we want you to think about now is the most advantageous tender, not the most economically advantageous tender. So we have to think about, does the supplier satisfy our requirements? That's the first one. And how does it best satisfy those award criteria by reference to the methodology and the importance of those criteria? Bearing in mind, of course, that there is a minimum of 10% on social value. So that is where it beds in social value in that particular respect and how it needs to be considered. So social value is also, because of the Social Value Act and because of the PPN 0620, it is still considered to be right up there in terms of the list of priorities, particularly when we are starting a new project, particularly when we are in the planning stage, in the preparation stage. And therefore, the Act itself encourages that early market engagement. And because of that, then that will then inform how our suppliers can make that positive difference and that positive impact to what we're trying to achieve. So public sector buyers should now start to benefit from holding things like supplier conferences and bidder events and meet the buyer events, where all of those potential bidders can have a chance to hear what they're looking to buy, what the focus areas are, what those expectations or those outcomes are going to be, and then hopefully from that give in turn much better bid submissions, because that's what we're trying to achieve with early market engagement. Inform the suppliers, have a bit of a clarification over what we're looking for out of that, and that sharing of that information should come better bids and hopefully better outcomes as well. So this type of event also gives that insight into how then social value can be built across the wider supply chain, because it may not be just the immediate bidder, it may be their subcontractors that they need to think about as well. The other thing that's coming in with the Procurement Act is a lot more transparency and accountability in how they spend our money. So the number of what they call contract notices or procurement notices has skyrocketed in the new Procurement Act. I think we've gone from about 4 mandatory notices to 13 mandatory notices in the new Act, which cover all of the activity across the entirety of any contract life cycle. So the obligations to publish all that information via all these notices at all those different stages is going to be made available to the public. It already is, you just got to know where to look. So there's going to be a new central digital platform where anybody can look at what's going on. How have they changed a contract? Why have they changed a contract? Why have they awarded to that particular supplier? So for those of us who have an interest in this, this then provides insights into how, for example, my local authority might be spending my council tax, and therefore who it's with and what it's for too. But it goes to the bigger departments as well, of course. And in turn, then that starts to generate that sort of impact on, well, okay, is that supplier actually delivering into the society contribution that they said they were going to be delivering? And therefore, can I keep an eye on whether that outcome is actually being achieved? And how also it will filter through that entire supply chain. If a supplier has said, yes, we'll give jobs to lots of local SMEs, has that actually happened? So lots to think about in social value. We have to think about it from a buy side and a sell side. And we also, if we are in public sector or we are associated with public sector, then there are some particular legislative areas that we have to consider and some particular policy areas that we have to consider too. So if you're on the buy side, do build your social value into your requirements, do get your stakeholder engagement in it, build it into your tender documents, and also think how it is going to improve your business strategically. Do identify the right outcomes for your social value framework. Think about how it matches your corporate social responsibility agenda. Is it doing the right things for the right people at the right time? We can almost add on a few more rights there, couldn't we? We could have, the 5 rights plus the 5, a number of social value rights as well. And it is much, much more difficult to maximize social value the further away you are from the people that are actually going to experience it. So when we think about social value, you need to think about those closer to you. So is it, for example, you've got a factory and it's having an impact on the local town or the local village with traffic or stuff like that? How can you make their lives better? How can you deliver some better social value back into that society? On the sell side, if you are selling or if you are receiving those tenders, we do expect suppliers to read the tender questions and also promote where they can add that value, and have also done so in the past. However, that doesn't stop suppliers who've never done it before from getting a look in. But the idea is to try and get good examples, case studies, which are also absolutely valuable to make our judgments on those particular areas. So that's all I want to talk about today in today's webinar. So we've got some times for some questions. If anybody does have any, feel free to pop them in the Q&A.
Yep. Thank you, Sharon, so much for that talk. It was very, very interesting to find out a little bit more about social value and the implementation challenges that are coming up with that. So I do have a few questions.
Okay.
What do you think are the most common challenges that organizations face when they are trying to incorporate social value into procurement?
Ooh, the most challenging areas. I think a lot of organizations don't really know where to start in terms of asking suppliers what social value areas they can help in. A lot of times they just seem to ask a set of questions that are just there just to tick some boxes. So they'll look at their CSR agenda and they'll go, oh, we're good. We need to improve some area in environmental or in sort of job creation. We'll just ask a random question rather than really thinking through. The supplier is going to be spending a lot of time trying to answer that question in a tender. What true value will we get out of that supplier when we place a contract on them? And we often find that we'll get asked these social value questions, for example, and then we never see the light of day with them anymore after that. Hence my sort of pointing towards, if you're going to ask a question, make sure it's something you do actually want to be delivered by your suppliers, and then measure it. So I think it's making that link between just simply asking a question because we've got to ask a question these days, versus are we going to get value out of it, and therefore how are we going to measure that value too?
Okay. And when you are dealing with things like contracts, how do you ensure that the social value commitments during the bidding process are followed through and delivered during the contract period?
Okay.
If you have any suggestions.
Right. So golden thread, if you just remember the phrase golden thread, it applies to an awful lot in procurement. From setting your specifications out at the start, getting your supplier to respond to that, putting that into the contract, and then making sure that what you actually asked for turns up. It's a pretty similar principle to that. So if you're asking a pretty detailed social value question of your supplier, and you are asking them to tell you how they are going to deliver a particular outcome, in your contract, make the link to that and put a set of KPIs in your contract as a set of deliverables to say, this is when you said you would be able to do it. We're going to maybe measure it on a quarterly or a 6-monthly basis, because you can't just do it just like that, and have a reasonable time frame for measuring that success. The other thing to think about as well is, on social value in particular, is never just let the supplier off on their own to just get on with it on their own. So, as I mentioned it earlier in the earlier part of the webinar, is work together with your supplier. Because very often, if you're asking them to help you deliver social value, then that's a collaborative thing anyway. So golden thread, and make sure that there's a collaborative approach to it.
Okay, and in regards to local communities and impact, how do you engage local communities in defining the kind of social value that is most beneficial to them? Especially, I think this is more regarding smaller businesses.
Yeah, okay. Again, you can go do all kinds of engagement activity. So if you sort of think about how public sector approaches its procurement, they do industry days and things like that. So you could do events around the local area to engage the local community. You could hold things in the local town hall or the local pub if you wanted to engage that local community, go to youth clubs, all of those kinds of things. Maybe engage also with the local authority to see if they've got any assistance that they can give you as an SME. Very often they do. They have a lot of these business catapult sort of teams and things like that to help you get engagement with the local community. And social media at the moment is a biggie. So I've seen a lot of SMEs in our area engage through Facebook. So that can also be a good engagement tool too, to understand what's the hot topics in this area at the moment.
And so what role do you think technology and data has to play into tracking and optimizing for something like social value?
It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. From a public procurement perspective in particular, they are creating what is going to be known as the central digital platform. And that is going to be the place where all contract performance data is going to go, including social value KPIs. So when all of that data starts to appear and be recorded in these kinds of portals, the ability to engage AI and big data analytics and stuff like that to see what social value is actually being generated through public money spent in a few years' time is actually going to be quite important. In fact, it's going to be very important to see how value for money is being delivered. A bit difficult in private sector, because unless you've got that ability to record and manage that kind of data electronically and then employ AI, depends on how big an organization you are normally. But again, those kinds of things need to be starting to think about to, again, reflect back on how has what we've asked for maybe 2-3 years ago now actually manifested itself as an outcome. But yeah, it's going to be huge, definitely.
And Sharon, pulling from a little bit from your experience, can you share any examples of successful projects where you noticed that social value had been implemented well, and what were the key outcomes?
Oh, there's an interesting one. I haven't seen any personally, but there are some incredibly interesting examples on that social value portal that I was mooching around in before I did this webinar to see if I could pull any examples out. And there was one that I saw there that was actually LNER, so London North Eastern Railway. And you think, oh, it's a railway. Well, what social value is that going to give back? But they'd tackled a number of different themes, actually, from employee diversity to making sure that each and every one of their stations up the line was environmentally friendly, that they were using green energy, that they were recycling all their waste and water and all that kind of stuff, as well as actually the way that they were operating their trains and how they were doing waste recycling and using of resources on all their trains as well. So nothing that I've seen personally, because most of my experience has been at the front end of the procurements and they've only been recent as well. So we haven't actually seen the outcomes of those yet. But yeah, there's some fantastic examples on that social value portal that are worth having a look at from all manner of different industries that you wouldn't expect.
Mm. And this is the last question that we currently have as well. So people feel free to pop anything in the Q&A as well. As social value becomes more embedded into the procurement process, what trends do you foresee in the next 5 years or so?
Gosh, well, I'd like to hope that they're going to, certainly from a governmental perspective and the current policy that we have, I'd like to think that they're going to make a few changes there because, as I say, the COVID-19 theme, I think, really is done and dusted. It was topical at the time when it came out. I think there's more important things we need to be thinking about right now. They hopefully will develop some of the other themes, particularly with regards to skills. Everybody I talk to currently is suffering skills shortages. It is in everything and anything, whether it is, procurement is suffering with a skills shortage right now. We're suffering with skills shortages in technology and engineering in particular. And I was also reading this morning that the likes of GCHQ and the security services are incredibly keen to employ those with neurodiverse skills, very often because they are incredibly good at data analysis and mathematical computation. So having that engagement in terms of making sure that there is space for those people to have that kind of employment and therefore give back to society and make them feel fulfilled and having a really worthwhile job, I think is some of the trends that we're going to start seeing. Probably also a lot more on the environmental side as well with the current government and their drive towards net zero. So I expect that will also be quite a driver.
Okay. Well, it's been a very interesting webinar today. If anyone has any further questions regarding any of the conversation that was had today, feel free to contact. Like I said, we popped the inquiries email address here for you. At Oxford, at the Oxford College of Procurement and Management, we have courses that range from the level 3 all the way up to the level 6 for SIPs. So if you have any questions regarding any of those, feel free again to drop us. You can always click through to our website or book a one-to-one consultation where you'll speak to someone like me or a member of our team. And otherwise, I hope that you have a lovely rest of your days, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.